Okay, we are continuing now with the Stamp Act Congress. So we've established three of the big taxes and the Sons of Liberty. Well, in the U.S., well, sorry, there's no U.S. In the British colonial America, they established the Stamp Act Congress. So delegates from 9 of the colonies, there's 13, 9 of them met in New York City in October 1765. So this is still when these are happening, with the goal of convincing Britain to repeal the Stamp Act. The Congress issued a Declaration of Rights and Grievances, which included only the colonial assemblies had the right to tax the colonies, going, wait a second, this is our job. You want money from us, you go to the people who can tax us. You can't. Trial by jury was a right, and the use of an admiralty court was abusive, which it is. So an admiralty court means you're a sailor, you're going to be tried by the Navy. You'll remember hopefully from Citizenship where there were all those punishments, including being hanged if you were for deserting in the military. No. They're saying, you know what, guys, not only can you not try the average citizen, you can't try any American colonist. That is up to us. We have to have a jury. It is our right. And this right was set up by William the Conqueror back in from 1066. So this was a right that every British citizen should have had. And the colonists insisted they possess all the rights of Englishmen. If we are citizens, we are equal. This is the Enlightenment. Natural law. All men are created equal. And without voting rights, so if we can't vote for Parliament and who goes in, if we don't have a vote in Parliament, then Parliament cannot represent the colonists. So you either give us a vote and you give us a seat on Congress, or you don't have any say over us. That's what's fair. This is, of course, the British merchants are affected by this Colonial Stamp Act, boycotted, protested, and demanded the law need to be repealed. So now the merchants are backing this, saying, guys, the colonists are boycotting all our goods. They will make their own clothes if they have to. They're not going to buy ours. They will just not drink tea. They're not buying our stuff, and we're losing money. So you know what? Stop taxing them. This is printed from the March 1766. This is another political cartoon, which I should start throwing at you next week. It shows a funeral procession on the banks of the Thames with the warehouse in line, in the background of which is inscribed the Sheffield and Birmingham warehouse goods, now shipped for America. George Granville carries a coffin inscribed Miss Aim Stamp, B. 1765, died. So here they are. In 1766. On the quay are two large bells over here. One inscribed Stamps from America, and the other were stamps returned to England as no longer needed because of the repeal of the Stamp Act. The other is marked clearly Black Cloth from America, intended for the funeral procession which follows. So this is, you know what? You need to repeal it because you killed our companies. You've killed us. You've killed our pocketbooks. So they are demanding in England. This is actually printed in English from England from an Englishman. A political cartoon about the unforeseen negative effects of this stamp. So this creates the committees of correspondence. It is difficult to communicate across the distances in the 1700s. The telegram won't even be invented until the 1840s. The colonists have the night riders for the newspapers, but there's no post office yet. Once again, the post office is part of the United States. It's a service, not a company. Well, at this point, we don't have that service at all. So it's difficult to communicate, and committees of correspondence were a communication network set up to keep groups that oppose the policies in touch with one another. So they're not the same as the night riders who were just going for the newspapers. These guys are set up to communicate between these groups. So our different rebel groups are starting to organize. And the first committee was set up in Boston in 1764 as groups united to oppose the Stamp Act. James Otis, a local lawyer, was one of the founders of the committee, and more than 260 different committees were formed in Massachusetts and interacted with the Boston committees. By 1774, all 13 colonies and committees and those committees that were instrumental in providing the framework for the First Continental Congress. So, first they're just committees, keeping the colonies in touch. Remember, Benjamin Franklin wants them to unite anyway. And there ends up being more than 260 different committees formed in Massachusetts. But the correspondence committees keeping them all together. And they're the ones who helped take all these committees then. And when they needed to, created the First Continental Congress. This is how it was out, Britain being able to stop them. They are able to organize an actual governmental system. Not a great one, but one that is organized enough to become a united force. Because if you're going to start a rebellion, you need to unite your rebels. Just ask Mon Mothma and Bel Organa. So the Declaratory Act of 1766, passed by Parliament as a face-saving gesture, Parliament asserted that it had the right to make and enforce laws that required American colonies to obey. So they just declared in 1766, well, fine, we're going to pass a law. Now you have to obey us, because we said you have to obey us. Remember, we've got people not just protesting in the streets of the United States already. We've had one group who gets a bit violent. This is not going to go over well. So most leaders of the opposition movement to the Stamp Act didn't pay much attention to the Declaratory Act at all. Going, yeah, you can declare what you want, but good luck with that one. And they satisfied with their victory in getting the Stamp Act repealed. So they repealed the Stamp Act, but now they made this Declaratory Act. And yes, make sure you take a note on this one. You're going to need it for your end of unit project, which 4A knows about, but I don't think the rest of you do. And that's because they're ahead of all you guys. You might want to catch up. So the Townshend Acts in 1767. They were a series of laws that replaced the Stamp Act. So we got rid of the Stamp Act. Now they're just going to give us more. So while the acts were taxed the colonists without their consent, there were indirect taxes that they were paying for and some didn't realize. And therefore they embedded in the price of the goods purchased. Because remember, direct tax, you see the tax, indirect is being added onto the price of the item. So examples include the New York Restraining Act, which suspended the New York Colonial Assembly when it did not agree to the Quartering Act. The Quartering Act, which you need to know, said that civilians must house soldiers in their home. Yeah, you don't have a say about it. You have to. They don't even put these guys in barracks. No. You are cooking for them. They're eating your food. They're sleeping in your bed by your fire, and you're providing the wood. This is one of the amendments might now make a lot of sense, where it says you can't force us to let soldiers in our house. That's what this is all about. It was such a sore principle that it ended up at one of the first 5 amendments in the Bill of Rights, that a government can't do this. So the New York Restraining first suspended the New York Colonial Assembly when it said, no, we're not going to agree to let you quarter in our homes. Then the reorganization of the customs services created the writs of assistance. That's one of your vocabulary words. You better know what it is. In the Townshend Duty Act, indirect taxes on many everyday purchases, including lead, the stuff you make bullets out of, or musket balls, but at this point, the colonists are figuring out the rifle. British, they still have just muskets. Paper, well, they're getting our paper again. Paint, glass, the things you make glasses and mirrors, and tea. And this is before we just started boycotting the tea. By the way, this is Charles Townshend, the British Chancellor and Exchequer. By the way, the Exchequer's the head of the tax collectors. For example, in Robin Hood, you know all those taxes the sheriff collected from the people of Nottingham? Well, as part of the sheriff's jobs in the Middle Ages, they had to then take the taxes to the Exchequer, and they had to pay a certain amount. And if you should note for Robin Hood, if they didn't have that amount, they took it out of the sheriff. He had to make the difference up. So that's what the Exchequer is. So our writs of assistance. Writs of assistance were court orders originally passed in Massachusetts in 1751, which allowed custom officials into locations for contraband. You know that amendment about having to have a warrant? Once again, the colonists are getting peeved off. Items that were to be smuggled into the colonies without the proper duties or taxes paid. And one of the most famous examples, once again, is from one of my direct ancestors, good old John Hancock, whose ship was forcibly searched, and yeah, he was smuggling. The searches were non-specific, so they didn't even have to tell you what they were looking for. The goods being searched for did not have to be announced, nor did the locations searched. They just grabbed a writ of assistance and they could search what they wanted for whatever they wanted, and they didn't have to specify why they were searching. Compare this to now our system, where not only do you have to have a warrant because it's in the Bill of Rights, when a police officer goes to get a warrant, to get the warrant they have to say exactly where they are searching, who they are searching, and what they're looking for, and give evidence for a reasonable suspicion that they will find that there. This just let them go search what they wanted. Not only were the colonial businesses allowed to be searched, but custom officials were also empowered to search private homes. Once again, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Well, it includes a lot of state constitutions, and it wasn't in this one, a right to privacy, the privacy of your home. You can't just come search without a reason. You can't just walk into my house without a warrant. And as I said, that warrant they have to prove to the prosecuting attorney who sends it out, or the district attorney, not prosecuting, the district attorney, that they have a reason in what they're looking for and why they're invading your privacy. Not only were colonial businesses allowed to be searched, but custom officials were also empowered to search private homes. And, of course, this is a direct violation of their rights. I'm not even going to say they felt it was. I'm saying this is a direct violation of rights. So, for them to just be able to barge into somebody's home with this piece of paper that doesn't say even what they're looking for or why they suspect or anything. So, in opposition to the rights comes James Otis. You do need to know James Otis. He's a former customs official and attorney, and was an important leader in the colonial opposition to the British mercantile policies and the Townshend duties. He represented the Boston merchants in court cases that attempted to block renewal of the writs. He argued that the writs violated colonists' natural rights. Once again, this is the Enlightenment. It is the belief that, power does not come from God, the divine right of kings. That is not how it happens. There's no such thing. Everybody is born equal. We have equal, unalienable, natural rights. And he's saying this is a clear violation. So a man's house is his castle. And whilst he is quiet, he is well guarded as a prince in his castle. Meaning, well, if he's not out bragging about what he did. And this writ should be declared legal, would totally annihilate this privilege. So you're invading our privacy here, guys. And after a harsh attack against a Boston customs official published in a newspaper, the official found Otis and beat him severely with a cane. For the remainder of his life, Otis was subject to bouts of temporary insanity from this, and was killed by lightning in 1783. But not before he saw his country finally free. So the Townshend Act is repealed in 1770, but don't think things are going to get better. So although the major protests of the taxes were limited to colonies, they did cause significant reduction in trade once again. So here comes the British merchants once again. See our nice little British merchants going, guys, you're hurting our pocketbooks here, Parliament. You want our support? You're not getting our support because you're peeling off the colonists to the point where they won't buy our goods. So you know what? You're hurting my pocketbook here. So people living in the American colonies greatly reduced the amount of items they purchased from the British merchants because of the Townshend duties. This is, what is that word? Basically, they'll just make it themselves if they have to, and you know there's black market trading going on. So therefore, the British merchants pushed to have the taxes repealed because, this is hurting their pocketbooks significantly. So, just so you can see this, well, we do have people rioting. We have people getting violent. The most effective way to make change in this period was to hurt the merchants' pocketbooks. You start hurting the wealthy and the upper middle class here, the more affluent people, they're going to start paying a little bit more attention to you when you start hitting them in the pocketbook. If you're hurting them financially and not physically, it goes a lot further. Just my 2 cents, but that's something you need to remember for when you decide to take over the world or create a rebellion and then take over the world. So therefore, the British merchants pushed to have taxes repealed, and they were in 1770. However, there was one new one that just was too much. The British maintained their tax on tea. This is directly led to the Boston Tea Party. Also to a nice, beautiful boycott in the United States, where we just stopped drinking tea and switched to coffee. And that is why Americans are obsessed with coffee. And a lot of them drink coffee. To the point where the coffee companies didn't even feel the Great Depression because there's so many addicts in the United States. It's because at first we boycotted the tea, then needed a caffeine fix, and we just switched to coffee. So next we will have the Boston Massacre. Woohoo! The trial of the British soldiers from the Boston Massacre. You're going to see a famous face defending them. Conflicting views of the event. We might have made it look, done some propaganda, made it look worse than it was. And remember those night riders I said were going to ride along and tell everybody? They rode along and told everybody. And went into the newspapers, American newspapers. The British thought it would just blow over because most of their population isn't literate. They didn't realize that just what the colonial newspaper system did. Then there's the Boston Tea Party. Then the Intolerable Acts, which we are going to go over next week. And the First Continental Congress. Then you're going to have a project.